right, good afternoon, church. So glad to see you guys here today. It's been a busy week for us. Pastor Feet and I, we've had a lot of things. We've had to visit folks in the hospital. I had that baby dedication this morning. Twins, that was great. And yesterday we married a couple. We married Richard and Lady at Yomar's house. Yomar Maria, raise your hands. It was great. We actually had it at their house. It was a beautiful, beautiful little service right at their house in Three Lakes here. It was right as the sunset was coming in. It was a wonderful, wonderful time, and it was good. It's great to be here with you all today again. Let's go in the back here, guys. We're going to set the PowerPoint here because I'm still having issues with my phone. We are in the middle of our series right now on Rewind. We're doing Rewind. And as you may remember, we have been looking at different topics that we've been looking at in the past. We started this whole year doing Launch, and Launch was the theme of this entire year. And what we decided to do is just to give you guys, either members that are here, just a little reminder, a little refresher course of what are the things that we've been discussing. And if you're visiting us for the first time, just to get an idea of what are some of the things that we at Miami Temple we've been looking at. What have we been discussing? And what we're looking at today is just a few different thoughts. Oh, here, thanks. What we're looking at today is a few different thoughts on what it means to be a counterculture Christian. You may remember 2 weeks ago I came out singing Mr. Rogers, and I wonder if people were like, I wonder if he's going to come out and sing again. No, I'm not singing again. That was a one-time thing. My voice was just, it was bad. Still recovering from that. But before that, I'm still recovering. Jeez. Before that, we talked about what it means to use pop culture to reach people. Paul and Peter and the apostles, they used the things that were popular around them to reach people for Jesus, and we talked about how that is possible. However, today we're going to be looking at what it means to be a Christian in today's day and age, and what it means to not only live, but to teach in a way that's countercultural. I'll be honest, when I wrote this message, I gave the message I gave the material to the folks that print the bulletins last week, and I was nervous because of everything that happened this week. God, I hate it when God does this, but I understand why he does this. I hate when I plan something, I'm going to preach a sermon, and then something happens, and then you're like, Lord, I can't preach about that because everyone's going to think I wrote it because of this. And the Lord's like, too late, you got to send it. It's already done. But actually, I ended up going pretty well in the first service when I preached it. This message will give you something to think about, if nothing else. I think you'll enjoy it. So before we launch into it, I want to invite you again to bow your heads with me as we seek the Lord in prayer. Father God, again, thank you for this day. Thank you for giving us this time, this opportunity to come and share with one another. It's been a long week for some of us. We've had school. School's coming up. We've had work and different things, and we just ask, Lord, that as we're gathering together, that you would speak to our hearts. Help us, Lord, to be able to understand and to grasp and to apply this message today. This is our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. So, let's go to the next slide here, guys. We're going to go back here to Acts chapter 17. This is a month ago we talked about this to bring you up to speed. Paul is on Mars Hill. Paul is one of the apostles of God's people. He's going and he's meeting with this group of philosophers on Mars Hill. And we talked about Paul shows up in Rome, and he's in this place where there's tons and tons and tons of idols. It said that there were 30,000 statues in Athens, and there were not in Athens. He's not in Rome. He's in Athens. There were more statues in the city than people, and so he sees it. Next slide. He goes and sees all these statues, and there's different gods, and he doesn't know how to deal with these things. So he goes to the marketplace and he starts meeting. He starts talking with individuals about what does it mean to be a disciple. And next slide. He says this. And we're launching right into this because we have a lot of ground to cover. This is kind of as a recap what we talked about almost a month ago. For as I pass along and observe the objects of your worship, I found also an altar with this inscription, to the unknown God. What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you. And to bring you up to speed, Paul basically said, listen, I see you guys are very religious people. I go and give you credit for that. Credit is due because I'm looking around your city, and there's tons of different statues. You have idols. You have not idols. He didn't say it like that. He said you have objects of worship, and I even found this God that says this. You have to the unknown God, and what you guys worship out of mystery. You don't know what this is. I'm going to tell you what this is. And so, next slide. Next slide. He says this. He starts unpacking, using a lot of the same terminology that the philosophers back then had. I know you're like, what did he say? You're like, not far. He's thinking, this doesn't make sense. This is a jumble of words. But what we said last time was that he started sharing from their own, these philosophers, from their own sources, the things that they used to debate and discuss philosophy, using the same things that they were very familiar with. He presented Jesus Christ to them. And it was a way of making connections and inroads with them. We didn't last time get the chance to kind of look at what he said because the message wasn't about the actual issues that he was talking about. But today we are. We're going to be looking at the actual content of Paul's discussion with the Stoics and the Epicureans on Mars Hill. Because as you're going to see, there are certain things that Paul talked about back then that apply to us in some ways today in 2019. And there are certain things in 2019 that we have to grapple with in terms of how Paul understood it back then. So we're going to go into the next slide here. If anything else, if you don't understand kind of anything else I go through, or if you kind of zone out or have to leave, understand this. What makes Christianity countercultural is not necessarily in the ways that we eat or dress. It's in the ways that we see our responsibilities to God and with each other. That's what makes Christianity countercultural. And sometimes we think, well, to be countercultural, it means to, go against the grain of what everyone else is doing. For example, I used this example last sermon. If like you're everyone here eats meat, goes to Burger King, you're not just a vegetarian. I forgot what the name. What is this? What is it like? Super vegetarian, like not a vegan. There's like even deeper than that. Raw or like octo lovo. What? It's like I said like basically like you're cool eating dirt. That's how counterculture you are. Now everyone else eats lettuce. I eat the dirt. That's the freshest thing. That's not what I mean by countercultural. Countercultural biblically isn't just doing the opposite of what everyone else does. As we're going to see, countercultural means to do and act in ways that you recognize your responsibility towards God and with each other. And when you do that, you may be living and doing things in a way that's opposite of what most people behave. So, next slide. Let me give you guys two people. One is Epicurus. Epicurus was the name of one of the founders of these two philosophies. There's the Epicureans and the Stoics. Brief synopsis of who they were, because these were the people that Paul was talking to when he was talking on Mars Hill. Epicurus was, like I said, the founder of the Epicureans, and these were a group of individuals that believe, among other things, next slide, that you had to have happiness as your main source, that you ultimately wanted to be happy in general. And the way you did that is by doing certain things. You sought community. You abstained from certain bodily desires. Like if you wanted ice cream, you shouldn't eat too much, because they also believe in living a temperate life. They believed in knowledge. They believed in moderation in all things. They believed in friendship. They believed in living a virtuous life. Not bad, right? Like, would we disagree with any of these things that they've said? Does anyone disagree with it? No. So these are the Stoics. But they had one thing. They didn't believe in God. They were completely atheists. They didn't believe in the afterlife or supernatural events, nothing. They believed that they themselves had the answer to all the issues. And so this is the Epicureans. The other side, next slide, were the Stoics. And who were the Stoics? Stoics were, does anyone know, that's where we get the word stoic from. Stoic. What does the word stoic mean today? Serious. Another for Stoics. What was that? What? Quiet? Quick? Brave. Stoic. Stoic's like no emotion. It's like Stoic's like chill. I'm just like chill. I'm good. Stoic. So if you think about Stoicism were just like you take life as it comes. You don't want to make too much of an issue. Just kind of take life as it comes, and it's okay. Like it's all gonna work out. If you want to put someone with the image, next slide. Next slide. Spock, Stoic. Think about this. This is someone that's logical, that's concrete. Life happens for a reason, and you just gotta have to go with it. You kind of have to ebb and flow with life, and it changes. You just gotta get through it. Would we all agree with that? Sure. In some ways, it's true. These folks were believers. They did believe in God. The issue here is that they believed that everything was a God. Everybody was a God. You're a God, I'm a God, he's a God, she's a God. The tree is a God, the chair is a God, the piano is a God, the flag is a God. Everybody's God. We're all gods. So again, the issue was that one group, the Epicureans, believed that there was no God, lived a lot of virtuous lives. That was great. The other side believed in a lot of good things, but now everything was a God. Everything was a God. Next slide. YOLO was their kind of their forte. That's both of them believed the same idea. You guys, the young group knows what YOLO is, right? For the olders, that's why I included the longer anagram, is you only live once. Because if I would have just said YOLO, some of y'all would have been like, yo-yo? Like, no, YOLO. You guys, anyways, you only live once. That's what it means. And both of them believe that. They believe that this world is all there is to it. You have one chance to get this right, because afterwards there's nothing. Nothing. But the issue with both of these, next slide, is that they both have a root, and it's the same root issue that permeates every single false religious system. It's the idea that people can save themselves. Like, if this isn't something that's just isolated to just the religious or the philosophically conservative or whatever. In general, we generally tend to believe that the solutions to all of our problems, we can solve themselves. Even today in the church, most of the times when we get called in to anoint someone, for example, it's at the very end when folks have given up on other things. At the end of everything, I'll call the pastor, call the elders, because then, now I need God. But the issue is, people can't save themselves. Paul was trying to teach them, and here, at the launch of his discussion, he does that. Let's go to the next slide here. He starts off by this, Paul does, and he shares this in Acts 17, verses 24 and 25. He says, the God who made the world and everything in it, being the Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man, nor is he served by human hands, as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything. So that's how Paul starts this discussion to these two different philosophers. He starts to the Epicureans saying, listen, there is a God, and to the Stoics is that he's the one that gives everything. He provides everything. Everything. He starts saying essentially that the building that you live in is not God's house. This is an idea that I think even permeates to today. There's this idea that happens in many churches, and I shared this last time. This may not be the case here at Miami Temple, but it probably has been. We've been around as a church for over 100 years, so inevitably this had to have come up in some place. But the idea that the church building itself, that these four walls, this physical structure, is where God resides, and that the things that happen outside of it are somehow less, it doesn't matter so much. Like, for example, like the idea that, well, we got to come here and we can't eat fish or something or meat in this area, but you'll eat meat at home. Like, I've seen that people that do things at home, they won't do certain things in church, or you'll behave and act in a certain way in the building, but not outside of it. It's just this idea that Miami Temple, the building, is somehow holier than your home. And this idea exists. But what Paul's saying to them is that, listen, God does not live in temples made by man. When we say we are Miami Temple, what are we saying? Where's the temple? You're the temple. The way you live and you behave, you act, you are the temple. The way that you interact, that's the temple. This is a building. This is a structure. It's where we come together, where we worship. But we must never get it twisted and think that this is the building that this is where God lives, as if outside of this he wasn't there. That's not what we're talking about. And so this is a very important concept to consider, because really, if we want to change, we will never change the world by going to church. We will only change the world by being the church. Most people think, well, if I could just get my coworkers to come to church, and maybe the pastors talk to them and give them Bible studies, that's the way their lives are going to change. That's not the way it works. In many cases, I probably shouldn't be the ones talking to them, because you're the ones working with them. What good is it going to be if I'm the one talking to them about how good you should be as a Christian, whatever, when you guys outside of the building, because this is the building, this is Miami Temple, you don't do or say or act in certain ways here, but you'll think it's okay to do and act and do things certain ways in your home, in your hospitals, in your works. This discongruency. Don't bring them here. Be the church out there. That's what Paul's saying. God doesn't live in houses made by people. He lives in people's hearts. And again, that's being countercultural, because most people think that in some ways, I gotta go to church, I have to complete, I have to go do my duty, you know. But what makes Christianity countercultural is not necessarily the ways that we eat or dress, it's in the way we see our responsibilities to God and with each other. Now, here comes the second section here, and I'm glad we have a lot of time. Ooh, thank God. I wanted to get through that first section, because this is where we're going to be spending a little bit of time, because we'll get there. Paul says this, Acts 17, verses 26 to 27, and he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place, that they should seek God and perhaps feel their way towards him and find him. Yet he is actually not far from each one of us. Now, notice that when Paul's saying this, he's actually quoting a lot of philosophers. Philosophers said this. Now, let's unpack this. He says, he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on the face of the earth. And having a lot of term priests, basically, like, he said that from this situation, from one man, God made everyone, and yet he made predetermined decisions on where everyone would live. You may or may not know this, but this text over time has been used to apply to certain other things, saying that, for example, if you're a Chinese person, you should stay in China. If you're an immigrant, you should stay where you are, and I'll stay where I am, because God has set boundaries for their dwelling place. So you stay there, I stay here. Makes sense, right? Now, and this is what I was telling you earlier. You know, I hate God for what he does, but I understand why he does it. Because I wasn't expecting the things that happened in the political world to happen this week, and I was like, God, like, but actually, I had a really great conversation with a few people, so if you stick around with me, you may like where this is going. So, check this out. Paul was a Jew, right? He was a citizen of where? Rome. So Rome obviously conquered a lot of the known earth back then. That's why they were in Palestine, they were in most different places. But when you think about where Paul's view of race and where Paul's view of people came from, where did people disperse from, you would remember the story of Genesis. Well, actually, first of all, let's actually make something clear. Paul is really saying that when he started off by saying from one man he made every nation of mankind, he was saying that we're all humans. First of all, that's what first we have to understand, that we are all humans. But the second part, as I was saying, is that his view of where everyone came from the Tower of Babel. As a God-fearing Jew, he remembered the story of Genesis in Genesis chapter 11 and 12, right before Abraham comes on the scene. That it's an interesting situation that from one group, they all spoke the same language. But yet, when they were trying to build this massive tower that reached to heaven, God did something crazy. To give you guys the short version of what happened, it was a simple plan. It was build the city. Second, build a tower that reaches to heaven. Third, hoi ergar homenoi plios mes gresoses. Wait, hoi ergar homenoi ploses es. It was a joke. Like, you gotta understand, like, that's literally what happened. He's like, listen, we're gonna build the city. Then we're gonna, go back here. Nope, go back here. Then we're going to make a tower that reaches to heaven. And then they didn't know what they were saying. And then everyone's like, wait, what? And so from one group that spoke the same language, God divided everyone into different languages. Boom. God divided them out. But remember, we're looking at Acts chapter 17. What happened in the book of Acts chapter 2? Remember that? So, whereas in Genesis chapter 11 or 12, I can't remember where it is, you have from this one family, God makes a lot of different people groups, different languages. Way in the New Testament, God takes all of these different people groups that were in Jerusalem, God-fearing Jews from all over the world, and he does this thing called Pentecost. And even though all these groups were from different places, he gives them all the ability to speak and to understand each other as if they spoke one language. That's pretty cool. So God's the one that had set a time where everyone spoke different things, and now they came together for the express reason that they would understand and know God. And he started doing that in Acts, where after Jesus came, after the resurrection, boom, here comes this gift of tongues, and now everyone can know who God is because Jesus Christ has come on the scene. Wow, that's cool. I always think that's so nifty. But we have to understand that the way that we have understood this text, in some ways, I can only speak as an American born here in the U.S., like I said, that text has been used in different ways. And your experience with this text and your experience with boundaries and ethnicities and everything might be different depending on whether or not you were born in the Caribbean or Africa or South America or Asia. I don't know how that's played out where you're from in your experience. But I can speak about American history as we've understood it. This is a very complex issue, race and society. I'm actually very comfortable talking about race because I am a mixed race. My dad is Dominican, my mom's from El Salvador, but yet for some reason people still, because we tend to think, no pun intended, black and white, people seem to think, oh, you're Dominican. I'm like, no, I've never been to Dominican Republic. I haven't. They're like, what, sacrilege? I'm like, I know, but I love mango. I love plátano, that's great. But I'm not Dominican. I'm literally half Salvadorian as well. But I'm comfortable in race. My wife is half white, half like Scots or Irish, and half Venezuelan. But people be like, oh, you're white because she looks white. And my kids are straight up confused because I feel bad for them. And actually, not feel bad for them, I feel great for them. But when my son was born, especially, we were in Greenville, they were asking me to fill up like the race, like what race is he? And I'm like, listen, I'll tell you what I am and what my wife is, and you tell me what to mark. And so we told her, and she's like, I mean, just mark one. I'm like, but I don't like the choices I'm given. She said, well, there's a thing that says other. I'm like, okay, I will mark other, but the whole thing is a sham, okay? And it is. I'll tell you why. So, buckle up. We're going for a ride. History ride. You guys know I love history. This shouldn't be no surprise to you. Did you guys know that before the 1700s, race was not thought of along the lines of biology or genetics or physical appearance? It was actually considered a category denoting kinship, household, or group affiliation. So when we said, hey, this person is there was no such thing like black or white. This person was part of the tribe of whatever, because if you think about what today we think of ethnicity, that was more of a lines before the 1700s, what race was thought of back then. And I'm setting something up because in 2019, where we're at, we have not, like, the things of the past affect us today. And many times, like I said 2 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago, we're not aware of the past. So some of this may be brand new to you, some of this may be an old hat, but we're going somewhere. We're gonna go somewhere. It was a broad category denoting kinship. Who were you connected with? But what happened is in the 1800s, the United States was starting to come up as a powerful nation. And Virginia was one of our first, or was really the first colony that we had. It was a very strong colony. Along them in South Carolina, really, really good, strong colonies. But the issue was that there was a lot of agriculture that needed to be done, and there wasn't a whole lot of people there. So the colonists, they tried to subjugate and like conquer the native peoples here, but that didn't work too well because a lot of them were armed, and then they left and they then integrated with a lot of the other indigenous people groups around the area. So a solution for them was to get a lot of the slave labor that they were starting to get from West Africa, in Central Africa, South Africa, bring them to the New World and start making them laborers in their camps. This is something that was known as a transatlantic state slave trade. Happened years and years and years. Until it was outlawed in the late 1800s. It's a long history. We're not going to have a long time to talk about that. We're going somewhere. But there was an issue with having people as slaves indefinitely, because at root was, okay, there was indentured servants. Indentured servants had a set period of time where you'd be a slave, work for someone else, but then after your time was up, think about like 20 years of working as indentured servant, then your time would be up and you could own land, etc. Whereas if you were a slave that was brought on as property, you were basically a slave for life, and if you had kids while you were a slave, they were essentially slaves. So there was really no getting out of that. But how do you justify a way of basically keeping a group of people enslaved versus another group of people allowing them to go free? Well, there was this up-and-coming individual named Johann Friedrich Blumenbach. He was a gentleman from Germany who proposed in the 1779, and it was widely used in the 19th century with many variations, this initial idea of there being different races. Different than what Paul says. Paul said out of one blood, he made many people. But in the 17th, 18th century, this guy said, no, there's actually multiple races. There are There are the black race or Ethiopians. There's a white race or Caucasians. There's a yellow race or Mongolian. There's a red race, which are Americans, or brown race, which are Malayans. This has had several different categories. But if you look in the literature in the 17th and 18th century, this starts to make a change in the way people thought about themselves and race. It was no longer an issue of kinship. It was now a way of connotating certain physical attributes with certain predetermined ways of acting and thinking and behaving. And the way that people started thinking about race was more along the lines of these different kinds of groups. So there was different people that said, well, there's grades of intelligence that you can tell by just looking at someone's facial structure. So you can tell how learned someone is depending on the symmetry of their face. And this was, again, taught in textbooks, taught in things as science back then. There were different studies that said that you can tell someone's cranial ability where they are and kind of predetermine where they're going to be at. And again, this essentially also makes a ranking system for races. So if there are different races, then there are certain groups that might be better, other people that might not be so good. Such as, there was a profile of the Negro, the European, and the orangutan. So certain ideas that there were like certain races that were closer to like animals versus others. And this actually played out in books. Let me go back here. In books, where they'd be like, there is the apex, which is like the white man, and then there's like the black person, which is kind of like a man, but not so much. And then you go right on down the line until we get like the monkey from Planet of the Apes, something like that. And so this was again something that was taught about science back then. I need to be clear about this. This was science back then. There were different races that people believed that existed. Thomas Jefferson, one of the founding fathers of the United States, believed in individual liberty, except what was for white land-owning men. So women were not allowed to own land. Black men or black women obviously were not allowed to own land. Anyone, if you were not a white man, you were not allowed to own land. He actually thought of this idea. He said that black slaves require less sleep than European counterparts. Because, like I said, there were still white slaves and black slaves at the time. It wasn't a racial thing fully back then. But he believed that that biologically speaking, black people needed to like sleep less than white people because the different views of race. Samuel Cartwright, another prominent person at the time, he believed that there was a defect called drapetomania, which was a mental defect that caused enslaved black people to run away from slavery. Like it was a mental defect, not that slavery was terrible. Yeah, I don't know. It's just like I caught a little bit of drapetomania, so I want my liberty. It happens to all of us, right? You think that happens to us when we're at our jobs from time to time, right? Everyone wants to just run away from that. But no, it's not the same thing. It's slavery, apples and oranges. But again, this was the idea, the prevailing thought of the time. Books would propagate, and again, no pun intended, I know this is a black and white thing because I'm looking at it from the lens of an American standpoint. It's happened in America, it was a black and white thing. Hispanics, we didn't come around until like later on, and then we complicated things up, for lack of a better word. There was the idea that Negroes and Negro slavery, one, the first is an inferior race, the latter is its normal condition. The idea that slavery was somehow normal to black people was an idea that was perpetuated. You know the song, Jesus Loves the Little Children? Jesus loves the little children, all the children of the world, red or yellow, black and white. They're our precious in His sight. Those lyrics, if you not notice, they've been changed because they reflected an understanding of the 4-5 different kinds of races that existed. There was, again, this idea, 4 races of man. These are ideas that were pushed from the universities, from textbooks, from pulpits. They were all there. Just this idea that there are different races, that we're not all the same people, that we're not all from the same lineage. It was all there, and it was used in political advertising, saying that, you know, when people had to campaign for African Americans to be able to vote, they were like, well, one group is for the white man, the other is for the Negroes, and the way that they depicted people as if they were, again, less intelligent was a part of the way people reacted back then. And we could talk about this. Even white was a general thing. Whites in the United States Mexicans were considered white up until the 1920s, believe it or not. And there was white, there was Anglo-Saxon, but there were non-whites, were Celts, Slavs, Hebraics, and Hebrews. Up until like when there was changes in immigration happening, there was lots of people coming from Europe pre and post World War I, and at that point they had to kind of make the bucket for whites bigger, include Anglos and Celts and Slavs and Hebrews and Jews, and then everyone else was considered non-white. By the way, this is 2019. So if you have questions about anything that I'm saying, there's this thing called the internet, and you can easily look this up. Don't trust my word for it. You can go yourself and look it up. So again, we're going somewhere. I'm not just saying this because like, what are you talking about? We're going somewhere. Follow me with this. There was even this idea of eugenics, this idea that, well, from all of these different races, because there's different races, there's different hierarchies, that we can choose the best race, take the best characteristics of some and blend them with others, and we can get somehow this master race. Uh-oh, does that sound like something? Ding, ding, ding. Because from this same idea of different races, different ideas, there was this group called like the Nazis in the 40s that took this and they kind of ran with it. And ran with it really hard. And there was this thing happened like called World War II and all these things, and it was kind of nuts. So when we talk about issues of race and mixed race and all this stuff, Paul in his day, there was no question about what he was saying. Yeah, from one race, God has made all these people, and everyone heard that, and they were like, yeah, cool, we got that. But in 2019, we're dealing with a reality in our world that there's history that has happened. And the way that people have used the Bible to justify certain social practices has been terrible. So it's almost like we have to undo the way that we've been thought, that we've approached and we've thought of certain things, even ourselves, to try to view things from a biblical lens. Even to the point where in the 50s, you guys maybe seen this, Superman even had to be like, remember, boys and girls, if your school, like our country, is made up of Americans of many different races, religions, and national origins. So if you hear anyone talk against the school mayor or anyone else because of his religion, race, or national origin, don't wait. Tell him that kind of talk is un-American. Keep your school all American. Now, granted, they didn't fully practice what they preached because they also interned Japanese people during World War II. So again, the issue of race in America has always been messy, but it's messy for a reason. Because we have not been able to talk about race. Most of the things today, it's just, again, no pun intended, it's a black or white issue. Where the issue is like, oh, black lives matter. Oh, no, blue lives matter. But once you realize at the end of the day, we're all people. And we all struggle with the things. And I had a wonderful conversation after the first service. Talking with a friend of mine, we didn't believe the same thing, but we had a great conversation. He's like, what can the church do? What can the church do to help address these issues that are going on in society? And I said, well, that's hard because God doesn't give us a playbook of saying, hey, this is how we ought to do things. But I do know in this room, there are individuals that believe in, they're either, you consider yourself what, liberal or conservative. I hate that we have like a two-party system because that makes things literally one or the other, where human nature is very gray in the middle. But one of the things that we can do is start having conversations with fellow believers. The world may not get race or issues right, but if anyone should be having conversations that lead to mutual understanding, it should be people in the church, right? It should be that way, right? And it didn't used to be that saying your allegiance should be to Jesus Christ before your country would be a controversial statement. But here we are. It shouldn't be a situation where you say your allegiance to God and to his national origin, his truth should be beyond what you believe about yourself or about your religion, or basically like living for God. Living for him should be the biggest thing in your life. That shouldn't be a controversial thing to say. But in some cases, here we are. It's a difficult situation out there, difficult world out there. I remember what Abraham Lincoln said. During the Civil War, he said, my concern is not whether God is on my side. My greatest concern is to be on God's side, for God is always right. And I think when you look at this world and the issue of like, what do we do with individuals that are coming from different countries? That's the situation I'm not going to be able to address, and I'm much less I'm not going to do it from the pulpit. But what I can say is that when we talk about how we should address things, we should address it in a way that would honor God and would honor our commitment to loving God and loving people. That is countercultural in some ways. A.W. Tozer said, in some ways, to be right with God is often meant to be in trouble with men. And it's true. We talked about it 2 weeks ago. When Jesus came and talked about the kingdom of heaven being here and being for everyone, it got him killed. It wasn't the conservatives that got him killed or the liberals. At the end of the day, they both got him killed. And I need to be clear about this because I hate that we have thought about this as well. It's not the liberal media or the conservative media. It's people that have a problem. Like, we need to understand that we as Christians, we have to rise above all this rhetoric. We have to rise above, because if not us, then who? You know, God expects something greater of us. It calls us to be countercultural. What really makes Christian countercultural, again, is not the ways we eat or dress. It's in the ways we view and see our responsibilities to God and with each other. God expects something much bigger of you than he expects from other people, because other people may not know the truth, but you know the truth. But as with all things, it's sometimes much harder to do the truth than to just know it. Now, I'm done with that. Don't worry about it. We're done with that. It got kind of quiet in here, and it's all right. Hopefully, guys, you guys weren't too bored in that monologue. We're finishing. We're landing the plane. The last thing he says, in him we all live and breathe and have our being, and that's kind of understood. The last thing he says, Paul says, it's a very, very good reminder for us. He says, therefore, having overlooked the times of ignorance, God is now declaring to men that all people everywhere should repent, because he has fixed a day in which he will judge the world in righteousness through a man who he has appointed, having furnished proof to all men by raising him from the dead. So this kind of takes issue with everyone. One, he's saying, look, this injustice that goes on in the world is not going to go unchecked. God is going to somehow hold everyone accountable, you and I, but he's going to do it through Jesus Christ, because Jesus Christ, he came, he lived, and he died, and guess what? He rose again. And that, what Paul said, is the proof that you need. We have to be reminded that at the core of all these things isn't about living a good moral life, that God isn't going to love you more because you've lived a perfect life. That's not the way it works. He's going to love you because Jesus Christ came and died for you. Knowing who he is what changes everything. Talking about race and all this stuff, it's all good and well, but if Jesus isn't in your heart, you know, you can't social justice your way out of sin. You can't policy your way out of sin. You can't do, like, the only thing that changes the human heart isn't anything I say. It's the work of the Holy Spirit. And unless you know him, everything else is meaningless. But you know God is going to do something in your life because Jesus died and resurrected and is coming again. Now, someone actually said, Chuck Colson said, I know that the resurrection is a fact, and Watergate proved it to me back in the day. How? Because 12 men testified that they had seen Jesus raised from the dead. Then they proclaimed that truth for 40 years, never once denying it. Everyone beaten, tortured, stoned, and put in prison. They would not have endured it if it wasn't true. Watergate embroiled 12 of the most powerful men in the world, and they couldn't keep alive for 3 weeks. But you're telling me that 12 apostles could keep alive for 40 years? Absolutely impossible. Impossible. And the fact that, remember, they were willing to die gruesome deaths. Gruesome deaths. For what? A lie that made up to what? Gain money? They didn't make money off of that. They died because of it. So remember what they went through. The resurrection is what changes everything. And these men died believing in something that was fully countercultural. And that's what Paul said to these people. That God is coming, and he's coming again, and we've seen his resurrected body. He's coming again. And it was at that point they were like, no, too much. Too much. I can't deal with it. But again, that's what being countercultural means. It's not necessarily in the ways we eat or dress. It's the way we see our responsibilities to God and with each other. We have to remember that God is calling us to something greater than ourselves. And I'll finish with this. I love Ellen White. She has this really good saying, which is a love that embraces all humanity. She says this: even sinners will respond to kindness. While they may give hate for hate, they will also give love for love. But it is only the Spirit of God that gives love for hatred, to be kind to the unthankful, to do good, hoping for nothing again. It is the insignia of the royalty of heaven. Wow. She says that, listen, everyone can be good to you even if you don't have God. And we learned that from the Stoics and the Epicureans. You can live a good moral life without God. But to do the things that only God can do, which is to love your enemy as yourself, love your neighbor as yourself, which is to be kind to the unthankful, to do good, hoping to gain nothing in return, that's something that only God can do when you have him in your heart. And that's what, at the end of the day, what I want to leave you with. What changes need to happen in society are irrelevant if there's no changes happening in your heart today. God needs to be a part of you today in order for anything else to change. And today's no better day to start that journey. So in front of you, you may have a Connect card. Everyone should have a Connect card. And we're doing this every week because we want not only our regular members, our returning guests, our first-time visitors, everyone to have a chance to respond to today's sermon. You can do something. No one can do everything, but everybody can do something. If you've already filled out the whole name, address, you don't have to fill that out. Just put your name. But on the bottom, you'll see some decisions that you can take, some next steps today. First step will be, if you want to commit to seeking Jesus every day this week, check that. 2, if you commit to being on Jesus' hands, to commit to being Jesus' hands and feet through service, mark that up. 3, if you want to stay informed about the news that's happening at the church, mark that, and we'll add you here to our mailing list that we have. 4, if you'd like to speak with one of the pastors, with someone rather, about your decision today, check step 4. And step 5, if you'd like to accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior, if you've never done that today, I want you to check that off, because as we sing the closing song, our deacons that are in the back, they're going to be coming up to the front, and they're going to be collecting all of these cards. So just drop them in the plate as it comes, as we're singing the closing song. And as I said, we can't do everything, but what I hope that we can start from the sermon is conversations where we can talk with one another and be countercultural Christians in a way that leaves the world transformed, starting with your life. So, be a countercultural Christian. God is calling you to be one today. God bless you, and we're going to sing our closing song. Don't forget to drop these off as the deacons come by.